I just lit my candles. I don't know what you can see in the background, but today I want to talk about manifesting. And I have a video with my friend Jordan where I talk about manifesting, but the thing is I wanted to kind of make it more simple and easy to understand instead of like a long video. And so I'm going to make it short. As humans, we have the ability to manifest our thoughts. And we have a very strong ability to do this. We don't even know this. That's the interesting thing to me, is that most humans have no idea that we have the ability to manifest our desires just the way we want them. I think we need to start taking, and I'm going to go into the spiritual a little bit here, control of our birthright to manifest, because we are all born with the ability to do this. The thing that people don't understand is that every thought that you think of, whether good or bad, is manifesting your desire for what you want in your future. If you have control of your emotions and your thoughts, you can create what you want. And you can create what you want pretty much exactly. The thing that you have to think about is that when you're creating, you have to really want it. It's not like saying to yourself, oh, I want $1 million, therefore I'm going to just really hope for $1 million. It's not like that. What you have to do is think about it, and you have to think about it, everything that you want, with absolute love. If it's a greed thing, it's possible that you won't be able to manifest it. If it's more of a love thing, like, oh, this would make my life so amazing, then that is the right way of thinking. The first thing is to know what your goals are and what your desires are. You have to desire it, and you have to desire it with all of you. The thing is that you have to really desire what you want. It has to be one of those things that you think about and you just know that it's going to make your life amazing if you can do this. We have to be able to move around other things in our lives to make way and room for our desires as well. So not only do we have to have the desire, but we have to have space in our life to receive the desire. And a lot of people don't really think like that. Well, I just want a tiny house, and we're going to talk about manifesting tiny houses in particular. Well, I just want a tiny house. Okay, yeah, but have you made space in your life to receive that tiny house? One of the things that I did when I was manifesting my tiny house was I lived in the most inexpensive place that I possibly could live in. I lived in a very inexpensive apartment, and the apartment was in not a good area, and I even built the house in not a good area. But I basically did it so that I had the money out of my paycheck in order to put aside for the tiny house as I was building it. So I didn't let also the money that I had or didn't have stop me from starting to build my tiny house. I basically made way for it. I basically said, I don't have the money to build this right now, but I'm going to find a way to do it. And I leapt into the project of building my tiny house. I think even if you don't have the knowledge to build a tiny house, you can still do it, because you can find the knowledge. If you want something bad enough, the universe is going to give it to you. If you want something with love bad enough, the universe is going to be like, I'm going to give this to you. There is no other choice. So you have to want it bad enough, and you have to start looking for avenues, and then you get, information on the internet or library, wherever you want, and how to build houses, and pretty soon you've got the information and knowledge to build your own tiny house, even if you knew nothing from the start. And then all of a sudden these people are going to pop out of the woodwork like, oh, I want to help you build your tiny house. I mean, that didn't happen with me, but I wasn't really looking for people to help me build my tiny house because I wanted ultimate control over it. And not to say those people are definitely going to pop out, but you might find people that know how to use tools and at least show you how to use the tools so that you can build your own tiny house. I do want to mention that building a tiny house on wheels is completely different. And that is because it is screwed and glued together, which is completely different than a regular tiny house on a foundation. So there's extra things you need to know about building a house on a trailer, how to connect it to the trailer so that when you're driving down the highway at 55 miles per hour, your house doesn't blow off the foundation or your trailer. So that's really important. To actually manifest the start of making a tiny house, one of the things you have to do is start the tiny house. You have to be like, okay, I'm going to get the trailer. I might not be able to afford the trailer, but I'm going to find a trailer that I can afford and put the money into that, and even if I have to get a loan. And be diligent about paying off that trailer, because if you don't, then they're going to repossess your house. If you think about it like that, if you don't pay off your trailer, they're going to repossess the house. Your trailer is going to have your house on it. That would be terrible. So pay it off as soon as you can, if you do get a loan for your trailer. I think if you want a tiny house bad enough, the money will manifest itself. Even if you're like, oh, this week I can only afford a couple pieces of wood to build my tiny house. And I mean, I literally built a lot of my tiny house out of my car. I had a roof rack and I put like 2x4s. I was getting 2x4s and plywood and all that put on the top of my car, and I built my house basically out of my car. And I was like, well, where am I going to build this? If you're building a house on wheels, you can find a place to build it. I didn't build mine in someplace. I didn't have a garage inside. That is the ultimate. If you can find a garage inside, that would be amazing. I couldn't do that. I had to find a place that I could build it with access to electric, but I built it outside. I didn't have a space inside a building to build on, because it's very hard to find a warehouse that has a door big enough where your tiny house can be built inside it. The door of that structure has to be like a little bit higher than 13.6 in order to drive your tiny house out of it. One of the things about manifesting your tiny house that I mentioned in the other video is you have to think about, and this is an active part of manifesting your tiny house, and that is how you would feel living in your tiny house. You have to create the love in your heart. You have to have the strongest feeling in your heart about what you want and why you want it. Create the love in your heart about what you desire, and that tiny house will come to you. Maybe it's not going to just be given to you, but you're going to have to do work for it. But if you think to yourself, what is this going to be like to live in my tiny house? What is it going to be like to have all this extra free time because I own a tiny house, because I don't have to work as hard? What is it going to be like to have a little garden outside my tiny house? What is it going to be like to exist in it? And how much peace am I going to gain in my tiny house? And this is going to create the love in your heart about how you will feel about having a tiny house. And that love will manifest your tiny house for you. And the universe has no other way to basically pave the path for you to receive it. So this is a very strong way of manifesting. I can't say this enough. What you want is manifested by your feelings and your desires, by your emotions and your desires and your thoughts. Every thought you think. If you have a negative thought about, oh, I can't do it, there's like a little bit of, I don't know, maybe I won't really be able to do this. As soon as you think that, rewrite that you just wrote and do the opposite in your mind about what you just thought that was negative. Say to yourself, so change your story and say to yourself, no, I really can do this. Even if you're thinking, oh, I don't really know if I really believe this, but change that thought so that you really have this feeling about how, like, that you really can do that. Like, even if you have to repeat it 10 times in your brain or even out loud to rewrite that bad thought, because that will get in the way of you actually receiving what you want. And the other thing I think is really important when you're manifesting a tiny house is actually, even if you don't know how to draw, start drawing plans and collecting plans and make a vision board or something so that you can collect ideas about your tiny house and make it physical. Because this is what you're doing in your mind when you are manifesting a tiny house, is you are making what you have in your head physical. So you're going to draw a plan with the tiny house on it. You're going to draw like maybe an elevation, or you're going to collect pictures. If you can't draw, you're going to collect pictures of all the things that you want in your tiny house. And you're going to make a little collage, or you're going to collect something, you're going to put something there. That's actually manifesting. That's actually making something real. I think the important thing is that when you get to the point where you can actually start to build a tiny house, don't not build it because you feel like you don't have the money. You have to just take the leap. And sometimes the leap is a risk, because it could be like getting the trailer and you're thinking, well, God, what if I don't even end up doing it? I had those doubts. Even though I've worked in the field of architecture for 20 years, I still had doubts. Myself, I still had doubts. So it's very likely that you may have doubts about it, but you got to take that leap. You can't like go, well, I don't know, and waffle back and forth about it. You have to make that decision and go for it. You can't waffle about it, or you're never going to get what you want. You're never going to be able to manifest that tiny house if you don't go for it. And that is a big thing in manifesting, is going for it. There's going to be some times where you're feeling overwhelmed. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, think about taking it little baby step by little baby step and making a habit about doing what you're trying to manifest. Every day you're going to work on it for 20 minutes or something. Whatever time you have. I worked on my house every day after work in the summertime. I worked on it every day. It was like I got home from work, I changed my clothes, I went right to my tiny house and I started working on it. It was like several blocks away. And that is what I did. I had a habit of working on. I had this laser focus. And when you want something like a tiny house, you have to have laser focus. You can't be like, oh, this week I want to do this week I want to do this. You have to really want it. And you have to be willing to work on it. I think also one of the things is you have to be willing to ask for help. So if you have an issue where you're not comfortable with doing something, I'm not saying you end up just like taking advantage of friends. I'm not saying that. You know, where they're doing all your cutting for you on the chop saw. You're going to have to learn how to do things that you've never done before. And you're going to have to, and that's just part of, I never used a chop saw before I built my tiny house. But now I own a chop saw, and it's like, and you can build a tiny house with minimal tools, really. You don't even need that much. But you have to take that power and you have to just do it and you have to learn it. And you just have to be safe about it and work on that with when you're creating a tiny house. And you have to learn things and you have to bite the bullet and you have to just go, I'm just going to learn how to use the tools that I need to do and not try to pawn it off on somebody. You're going to have to learn how to do it. But if you do learn how to do it, you're going to be like, I did this. At the end, you're going to be like, I built my tiny house. That's powerful. Instead of somebody, like, oh yeah, so, I don't know, someone that, built my tiny house for me. And then, I'm not saying that's, if you can afford that, I guess. But I own my house outright because I didn't pay somebody a fortune to build my tiny house. I built it myself and I own this house, all of it. And it was because I couldn't afford, if someone told me, you got to come up with $22,000 to build your tiny house, I'd be like, oh God, I can't do it. But I didn't think of it like that. I thought about it in little chunks. This week I'm going to buy a few pieces of wood. Next week I'm going to buy a few pieces of plywood. It's just what I could afford. And that's the way you should be looking at it. And that's the way you should be approaching building a tiny house. Not just trying to come up with the money all at once. And also, you might have pressure, outside pressure, because they're going to be like, oh, why would you build a tiny house? Why don't you just build an RV instead? But you have to kind of step back and not really listen to those people. I don't listen to people when I'm building my tiny house. I was like, I couldn't believe all the opposition I got. Actually, I thought it was going to come across more like, oh, that's really cool. But it actually didn't come across like that to people until it was done. And then they were like, oh, that's really cool. In the beginning, though, it was sort of funny because they were like, why would you do that? And I got a lot of opposition, especially from engineers, because they thought that it was a waste of my money. But I have a roof over my head now that I built and own outright. I pay less to live in this tiny house than people pay in taxes alone every year on a house they own outright. Who can say that? I live very inexpensively, and the tiny house has given me the tools to do that. And I feel blessed. I have an amazing life, and I created it. I manifested it. You can too. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment.